We're going to talk some NBA, going to talk some Jordan's documentary, The Last Dance, on ESPN right now with Ben Golliver, national NBA writer from the Washington Post. As all guests, he joins us on the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Ben, how you doing on this Friday?
I'm doing very well, hanging in there, day by day. I'm sure you guys are doing the same. At least I hope you are, and I hope all your listeners are staying safe too.
Yeah, we're all. I think we're all at this point, at least up here, we're all living the bubble life. So for whatever that's worth, right?
Well, it's worth a lot. It's keeping us safe. I'm doing the same thing. I've been locked down for quite a while, starting to go a little stir crazy. But it's nice to have that Last Dance documentary to kind of keep us busy and keep us talking hoops.
Absolutely. And before we get to that, I wanted to ask you about. A lot of the word has been circulating this week about, what the NBA would do if they would return, how they would return. And there appears, according to reports, that the idea of them going to Disney World, the ESPN Wide World of Sports complex, to resume the season in their own version of a isolated bubble. I just wanted to get your perspective on that. How viable do you think that is? How viable do you think it is for the league to return this summer? What is your perspective on all that?
Well, I hate to be a Debbie Downer, but I think that Adam Silver laid out his criteria for what has to happen. I mean, the number of coronavirus cases has to go way down. The availability of testing has to go way up, and there has been some progress on that front. Or there has to be a vaccine discovered so that they'll feel safe to play these games. And right now, we're basically 7 weeks in. I mean, there hasn't been tons of progress made on those fronts to really generate any momentum. So I think the NBA, from the league perspective, is just kind of still in a holding pattern. And I know it's really tough because, there's lots of very impatient people as owners, as fans, as coaches, as players, as agents, who all want to kind of fill that dead air with a lot of different proposals. But I think right now it's just a lot of speculation, unfortunately. Now, we sort of know the broad framework of what it would have to look like if they did bring the sport back. You would want to have a bubble. You want to have as few people in that bubble as possible. You would want to be able to test regularly everybody who's inside that bubble. And then you just play games without fans and try to put it on television and recoup some of your, your TV money. Look, we know they have an incentive to do this. If they can't play the rest of the regular season and they can't play the playoffs, it's going to be more than a $1 billion revenue hit for the NBA, right? So they're desperate to try to put something else back out there. But Adam Silver said it pretty clearly. He's not going to compromise player safety. And I think for that standpoint, we're still a ways away from this conversation getting very serious at all.
Just to follow that up, I was curious if, the LeBron James statement on Twitter when he was seemed very forceful in his tweet, his opinion about resuming the season. How much weight do you give that, the number one player on the planet, the biggest name in the league, is himself trying to push for the league to resume? Do you put weight into that, or do you feel that's just a player expressing himself online?
No, it matters a lot. Look, the Players Union is going to have to be a very active participant in all these negotiations, right? They've already had to talk to the NBA about the players' salaries, and there was a negotiation that, produced an agreement where 25% of players' salaries are going to start being withheld on May 15th. So the Players Union is going to have some say in terms of how they come back, what steps need to be in place so that they can feel safe to come back. And these conversations are ongoing, even about something as simple as opening up practice facilities so that guys can go get shots up by themselves, right? So the players' voice here definitely matters. LeBron's voice is going to be always going to be the loudest among the players. But I can also go back on Tuesday, and Steve Kerr, arguably the highest profile coach in the league, right up there with guys like Greg Popovich, said, we feel like our season is over. And they're obviously a lottery team, so he's just saying that he's not sure that the NBA is going to be able to bring back the regular season. So I think you have strong feelings and opinions and perspectives on lots of different sides, and it's a real leadership challenge for Adam Silver. His whole goal this entire time that he's been commissioner has been to lead by consensus, to make everybody feel like they're a part of the decision. And at this point, there's just a lot of different factions who have different priorities. A lot of the executives that I talk to from lottery teams are ready to say, look, season's done. We're good. We don't need to play any more games. We'd rather keep our players safe and healthy. Of course, if you ask the Milwaukee Bucks, the Los Angeles Lakers, and the Los Angeles Clippers, do you guys want to play the playoffs so that we can crown a champion? Of course, the teams that are the top contenders who were so close to reaching that summit with incredible regular season records, of course they want to come back. So like I said, it's just very difficult to build consensus across all these different groups.
We're talking with Ben Golliver, national NBA writer for the Washington Post, and we want to transition now, if you've been to The Last Dance. And there's a lot there, a lot to dissect. People have a lot of opinions. And I think an interesting part of it is a lot of younger people in our society never saw Michael Jordan, never saw MJ play. And this is just an unbelievable insight and evidence of the man and the player and everything else. But so far through 4 episodes, episodes 5 and 6 air this Sunday, starting at 9 p.m. Eastern. What has been the biggest thing or the biggest takeaway that the documentary has gotten right? And what's one thing so far that stands out that maybe they missed on?
Right. Well, I think for sure they did a nice job balancing the younger audience that you're talking about with the nostalgic older audience who does remember the Jordan stuff. So you're getting extra detail on a lot of key sequences. You're getting to hear from Michael Jordan himself, kind of just, lambast Isaiah Thomas and discuss the rivalry with the Detroit Pistons. But you're also getting the more general introduction to guys like Scottie Pippen or Dennis Rodman, and you're going to that crazy party scene in Las Vegas. So for people who just have no clue that Rodman dated Madonna or Carmen Electra, you're getting that kind of background. That's not easy to do. I mean, usually if you're a documentarian, you kind of pick one or the other in terms of audience. I think they did a nice job balancing that. My favorite part has been Jordan's interviews himself. And I say that I used to work at Sports Illustrated, and Jordan famously had like a blackout with Sports Illustrated for 20 plus years where he wouldn't talk to them because he was upset about a cover of his baseball career. They basically said he was embarrassing baseball by playing minor league baseball for the Chicago White Sox affiliate down in Birmingham. And, just always wanting to be able to interview Michael Jordan, ask him questions, get into some of the trickier conversations, whether it was his gambling habit or the conspiracy theories, or even just asking him about some of the players that he played against, like Isaiah. That's always been a dream of mine as an NBA writer. And so to watch the director be able to ask him all those questions to his face and get really honest, candid answers, to me, that's the central strength of this entire, documentary. I mean, the Rodman story about going to Vegas, that gets told by Jordan. Everybody else isn't super excited to tell that story until they find out Jordan's already opened up, and then everyone tells their side of it. So I think getting that level of candor has been the big strength. In terms of the blind spots in the documentary, I mean, his family is not mentioned at all. He had an ex-wife and he had a wife and children throughout that time period when he was such a big star in Chicago. That seems like a fairly big omission to me, just to not even discuss them in any way. And I guess that was intentional. The director just decided he didn't want to go there. He wanted to keep it about basketball and about the team. I understand that, but it just seems a little strange. And they also left out Joe Dumars from the Bad Boy stuff, man. Joe Dumars could really, really ball. And he was the one guy on that team, I think, who is remembered as a gentleman. He won a sportsmanship award. He went on to a long career as a front office executive, just an upstanding NBA citizen. And he was also one of the guys who gave Jordan more trouble, guarding him than just about anybody in the league. So I would have liked to at least see a few Joe Dumars highlights in that Bad Boys segment as well.
Something that was a lot of fun for me to watch was the Phil Jackson dynamic and getting that deep dive of how Phil Jackson became the coach and just his history, even in his earlier life, personally and professionally. But something that stood out to me was when Doug Collins was getting interviewed, and he said, I just knew that Phil Jackson was, going to take my job, essentially. I'm paraphrasing, but he's like, I just felt it. I just felt it. I just knew that I wasn't really going to last, and Phil was going to be the next man up. And them going into details, them being the documentary about the triangle and Michael Jordan's evolution as a player. I just want your thoughts and insight on how important Phil Jackson was to Michael Jordan to really show him that there's more to just going out and getting 40 or 50 a game.
No, it's amazing. The Phil Jackson story is hilarious because it begins in Chicago the same way it ends, right? Phil Jackson's kind of sneaking in the side door, maybe like making a little power play with Tex Winter to become the head coach, a little bit behind Doug Collins' back. And then at the end, it's Jerry Krause who's sort of courting Tim Floyd and saying, you're going to be our next coach and you're going to be the guy who replaces Phil Jackson before the season even starts, the last dance season of 97, 98. So it just shows you there's some very weird, strange management dynamics throughout that tenure that can kind of all be traced back to Jerry Krause. The triangle offense stuff is so important because Michael Jordan was easily the biggest star in the NBA under Doug Collins. They laid that out pretty clear MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, All-Star Game MVP, and also Slam Dunk Contest champion, right? Scoring leader, 37 points a night. I mean, just out of this world statistics. But if you go back and look, the Bulls team offense was actually just barely above average, despite all of Jordan's heroics, because he was a one-man band. It was a lot like the Russell Westbrook show in Oklahoma City after Kevin Durant left, right? Where you just have one guy doing everything, going to the basket all the time. It wasn't an efficient team offense. And, Phil Jackson shows up. Almost immediately, they leap up to an elite offense. And by that first championship season, 1991, where Michael Jordan's really bought into the triangle, you've got guys like Paxson hitting big-time shots in the playoffs. Scottie Pippen is more empowered, and just the ball is moving a little bit better. Chicago's offense jumps all the way up to number one from a team offensive efficiency standpoint. So it's very similar to what happened with the Golden State Warriors, where they replaced Mark Jackson with Steve Kerr, and immediately they kind of unlock Steph Curry and the power of Klay Thompson. Everybody gets a lot better from a team perspective. It's just kind of crazy how history repeats itself that way. But don't forget, Jordan started to share a little bit, but he still ate first. I mean, he was still the scoring leader under the triangle offense. He was still the most dominant individual player. It was more about just convincing him to trust his teammates just enough, not really rewiring him as a player entirely, because he still wanted to put the ball in the hoop more than anybody else.
Ben Golliver joining us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline here on 97.3 ESPN FM. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Ben Golliver, Washington Post national NBA writer. Ben, following up on that point about Jordan and his teammates, I'm curious from you because a lot of people try to use the need of a second teammate, that second star, that Batman and Robin dynamic against some players. They try to use it against LeBron. I feel like some people are trying to use it against Jordan a little bit. Do we sometimes undervalue the importance of that second star? Jordan himself said that, I needed Scottie Pippen, and that's not a negative against Jordan. To me, that's more of a dynamic of how sports work. Nobody wins by themselves, right?
You're right. No one wins by themselves, but I do think that it's also really important in basketball. The biggest stars deserve the lion's share of the credit. That's how it should be. There's a real halo effect in this documentary. I mean, look at that 97-98 season, for example. Scottie Pippen has a trade request. He sits out for multiple months as he's recovering from foot surgery that he delayed into the season. Dennis Rodman's partying in Las Vegas at a certain stretch of that season. And yet the Bulls pretty much coast along despite all of that because Jordan just puts him on his back and carries him. It's like the old thing he used to tell the centers, get on my cape and fly with me, right? That's all you really have to do. That was his level of skill and talent and just overall impact compared to everybody else in the league at that time. So everybody wants to say, what does Michael Jordan look like without Scottie Pippen? I think the better question to ask is, what do guys like Scottie Pippen look like without Michael Jordan, right? I mean, I think it's he had all sorts of questions, whether it was the migraine early in his career, whether it was sitting down at the end of the bench, during the playoff stretch where Kukoc hits the game winner in '93. He doesn't want to check into the game. There's other moments where he's having injury issues in big moments. I think Scottie Pippen's reputation, before they sort of got over the hump together, was as a guy that you couldn't necessarily trust and you couldn't count on. And to me, that's unfair. He's an incredible player, one of the all-time greats. But I think he certainly benefits from playing alongside Jordan, and it's a mutually beneficial relationship. I think that, could Jordan still win titles if Scottie Pippen had never come along? I think it's possible, but of course he needs the right amount of support. But I also think when you're looking at those Bulls rosters top to bottom, I'm not sure that those were the deepest teams. And especially when you compare them to like the Bad Boys Pistons, who had like 9, 10 deep of veterans late in the 80s, or the Showtime Lakers, or the Boston Celtics of the 80s. I mean, those guys had Hall of Famers coming off their bench. A lot of times rotations, 8, 9, really, really quality players. And I think the expansion in the early 90s, which is sort of right when the Bulls were taking off, it diluted the talent across the league, and it kind of stretched teams' depth as well. So, to me, when I'm kind of giving out the credit for the Bulls, I do think you want to mention all these people. You don't want to diminish their roles. We should probably talk about Tony Kukoc also a little bit more than the documentary does. But ultimately, the story of the Bulls to me is the story of Michael Jordan's, drive to win and him pulling everybody along with him.
Ben, speaking of all the people involved, I did want to ask you also, if you people who like me have read books, like David Haberstram or Sam Smith, one of the things I don't think the documentary's gotten into too much, but I think that maybe gets overlooked by people who maybe didn't live in that era, was the influence of Jerry Reinsdorf and all this. He's the one who brought in Jerry Krause to be the GM. He's the one who kind of let Jerry Krause be the shield between him and everybody else. And that, there were times that Reinsdorf would negotiate directly with David Falk, Jordan's agent, with different things. So would you have liked to have seen more of an introspective look at Reinsdorf's involvement or sometimes lack of involvement in the Bulls organization?
Well, I think that's the ultimate genius of this whole thing by Reinsdorf because, Jerry Krause took all the arrows back in the day. It's clear that Jordan still really has a strong disgust towards Jerry Krause in terms of how he handled things throughout that time period. The number of things that they were mad at him about, whether it was courting Kukoc, whether it was not taking care of Scottie Pippen's contract, whether it was just even the personal stuff, making fun of how he looked, the fact that he's short and fat and kind of sloppy. All that stuff was deep-seated resentment, but it was brilliant by Reinsdorf because it kept all the heat off him that entire time, not only from the media, but also internally. Remember at the start of the 97-98 season, they asked Jordan, what's going to be the toughest part of the season? And he looks up at Krause's office. He's not blaming Reinsdorf for this stuff. He's kind of throwing Jerry Krause to the wolves, right? And I think as an owner, he's probably feeling like Krause earned his money more than just about everybody else in that entire organization because he protected the boss and he was able to sort of actually, in some ways, Krause was able to inspire these guys to play hard to kind of like prove points to him. So I do think he's kind of like the quiet puppet master manipulator here. But I don't want to give Reinsdorf too much credit because look what happened after Jordan left, right? The whole thing falls apart. It's a crazy 5-year stretch of losing. You look at the last 20 years of the Chicago Bulls, I would describe them basically as mismanaged. If they didn't luck into that number one pick to get Derrick Rose, they could be one of the losingest franchises in the entire league. And really, they only had about 4 or 5 good years, really good years, out of that 20-year stretch. And obviously, they're trying to turn it around with the new front office and everything else this summer. But it's been a really rough go since Jordan left. So I don't want to give Reinsdorf too much credit because I think a good owner would have found a way to stretch the Jordan experience for as long as possible. He would not have let it blow up in 1998.
Ben, I went over to your Instagram account at ben.golliver, and I saw a picture there, a post of what seems to be a bunch of Jordan 11 sneakers in a bunch of different colors. So I wanted to ask you this. If you have to wear one Jordan sneaker for the rest of your life, which one and what colors?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. So I actually grew up in Beaverton, Oregon. So it's like, that's world headquarters for Nike. So I had a lot of this Michael Jordan propaganda just kind of like, pumped straight into my veins from a very young age. But it's the Concords. To me, that's the classic, easy answer. Some sneakerheads are going to go a different direction. They might say the Jordan 3s. A lot of people like the Jordan 1s, like the real classic old school high tops. But for me, nothing beats a sneaker that a lot of people wore to prom, right? That black patent leather with the white upper. To me, it's the greatest sneaker of all time. It's also an easy answer. It's like saying Abraham Lincoln is your favorite president. It's like everyone's going to say, oh, yeah, cool, great. But to me, that's sort of like the gold standard for all of them. But, yeah, I don't know. You guys have a favorite? What's your favorite?
I got to go with the ones. Ones are just all time, man. You can't beat them.
Yeah, they're big. They're heavy. There's actually a scene coming up in an episode they haven't shown yet where he actually goes back in 1998 and wears some of his original ones for a game against the New York Knicks. And I don't want to spoil it too much, but needless to say, his feet were feeling it after that game, and he was appreciating the evolution of technology between 1984 and 1998 when it came to the sneaker technology.
Yeah, I would have to go personally, and this is just because of the color scheme. I think it was the Jordan 4, the black with the cement gray color on the bottom, because I'm personally biased to the color black, but that's just a personal preference.
Well, now's a good time to buy sneakers, guys. I'm hearing all the sneaker websites are having a real tough time because of the coronavirus pandemic. Nobody has anywhere to show off their wares, so maybe you can get some good deals on your 4s and your 1s right now.
Well, Ryan's got some extra money to spend because he doesn't have any sports gambling to work with right now. So now we know what he can spend his money on, right, Ryan?
Come on, man. You don't have to air out my dirty laundry like that. But you're right.
Well, the good news for you guys is on this coming weekend, there's going to be a big Atlantic City scene. They're going to be discussing AC and Jordan's trip down there during the playoffs and everything else. So you guys are going to be center stage on The Last Dance on Sunday.
Love it. Ben Golliver has been our guest here on the warm-up on 97.3 ESPN. Follow him on Twitter at Ben Golliver, Washington Post, national NBA writer and all guest. He joined us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Ben, I really appreciate the time here.
All right, gentlemen, take care.